Okay, let's dive into this. When we hear the term foot washing today, our minds almost immediately jump to, a dusty, antiquated relic of the past. Or perhaps we picture a very polite, safe, once-a-year church ceremony. But we really have to ask ourselves, what if our modern perception has completely neutered one of the most explosive, radical practices of the ancient world? Because today, in this explainer, we are conducting a strict, forensic audit of foot washing. We're going to look closely at primary evidence and the historical record from before the year 270 AD. And as we dig into this, we will see exactly how early house assemblies lived out a profoundly radical social subversion. I mean, this was a practice that literally leveled ancient power structures straight to the ground. It wasn't just a metaphor, it was a way of life.
I want to start by really challenging how we view power today. Take a second and think about it. For most of us, especially if you are navigating your 20s in our hyper-competitive digital culture, power is all about accumulation, right? It's about clout, it's about your follower count, upward mobility, and the sheer ability to extract service from other people. You climb the ladder so that others serve you. Well, the Greco-Roman world was actually incredibly similar. In that culture, authority was entirely defined by who got to sit at the head of the table while everyone else served them. The social hierarchy was rigid and it was brutal. But what if true, ultimate, cosmic power wasn't demonstrated by who you can control, but by who you are willing to wash? Imagine that. A simple towel and a basin of water became the primary weapons used to wage war against entrenched, oppressive hierarchies. This wasn't just a nice gesture. It was a literal blueprint for a completely inverted society, a total reimagining of human value and status.
To truly grasp the weight of this, we absolutely must look at the first-century language. You see, the Greek language has very specific divisions when it comes to washing. On one hand, you have the word luo, which means to bathe the entire body. In the early assembly, luo became the root concept for the once-for-all total bath of initial salvation, or baptism. But then there's nipto. Nipto means to wash just a localized part of the body, specifically like the feet or the hands. Think about it this way. If you take a full shower in the morning, that is luo. But if you walk outside barefoot to grab the mail and step in some mud, you don't need another full shower, you just need to wash the dirt off your feet. That localized daily cleansing is nipto. And as we'll see, that specific daily necessity carried massive theological weight.
So here is our syllabus for today's explainer. First, the dust of the world. Second, the ultimate cosmic inversion. Third, a radical assembly lifestyle. Fourth, cleansing the spiritual souls. And finally, the fall into institutional ritual.
Let's start with Section 1, the dust of the world. Before we can even touch the spiritual metaphor, we have to conduct a strict forensic audit of the physical realities of the first century.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it dispels a very common myth. There's this idea that foot washing was only necessary on scorchingly hot days, or that the concept of street dust was just a poetic figure of speech. But the physical reality was inescapable. The standard gear for the common Judean was the open-toed cordine sandal. And because of the simple biomechanics of walking, even on a cold day, the friction of tough leather against bare skin produces localized sweat. Since they didn't have socks, that moisture acted as a powerful adhesive for the pervasive limestone dust and, frankly, the animal waste that covered unpaved roads. So washing feet wasn't just a polite ritual, it was an urgent physiological necessity before stepping into any domestic space.
And this physiological reality was deeply embedded in the ancient social contract. Failing to provide water for a guest's feet was not just a minor oversight. It was an outright display of profound disrespect. We see this explicitly in the historical texts. According to the author of the Gospel of Luke, specifically citing Luke chapter 7, verse 44, Jesus explicitly calls out his host by saying, "I entered your house, you gave me no water for my feet." Water was the absolute minimum expected standard for a weary traveler. To deny it was to essentially deny a guest their basic human dignity.
And we know for a fact that this wasn't just some isolated regional issue. The year 73 AD marks the date of the famous archaeological excavations at Masada. When archaeologists dug through the ruins of this first-century fortress, they found primary physical evidence of footwear from this exact era. And what they discovered is fascinating. They found numerous leather sandals, overwhelmingly designed in an open flip-flop style or with simple multi-strap designs. Closed-toe shoes were incredibly rare among the general population. This definitively confirms that for the average person walking the streets, open-toed footwear was the undisputed standard. Continuous daily exposure to the literal dirt, grime, and waste of the world was simply an unavoidable fact of life. You couldn't escape the dust.
Which brings us to Section 2,
the ultimate cosmic inversion. We are shifting now from practical hygiene to the absolute subversion of worldly hierarchies.
The entire theological weight of foot washing is predicated on exactly who is performing the act. This is crucial. According to the author of the Gospel of John, in chapter 13, verse 3, the text meticulously sets the stage. It says, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God. Notice the intense, deliberate contrast here. The author is pairing supreme cosmological authority, a creator God who holds all things, with extreme socioeconomic degradation. Taking up a servant's towel was the lowest of the low. This text is suggesting something incredibly radical, that the washing of dirty feet is a direct manifestation of how the kingdom of God utilizes absolute sovereignty. It's not about lording power over others, it's about weaponizing that power to serve the broken.
To really understand the shockwave this caused, we have to contrast the Greco-Roman system with the Jesus blueprint. According to the Mishnah, a Jewish master couldn't even compel a Hebrew slave to wash his feet. The act was considered far too degrading, even for a servant of the same ethnicity. Yet in this new blueprint, authority is demonstrated exclusively through downward mobility. It was utterly scandalous to the ancient mind. Think about it. The creator of the cosmos strips off his outer garments, takes a slave's towel, and cleans the literal dirt off the calloused, filthy feet of fishermen and tax collectors. It was a complete and total overturning of how the world measured greatness.
And Jesus made it crystal clear that this wasn't just a one-off performance or a nice lesson in manners. In John 13:15, he uses a very specific Greek term, hypodigma, stating, "For I have given you a hypodigma, that you also should do just as I have done to you." Now, a hypodigma isn't just an example, it is a master architect's blueprint intended for strict structural duplication. Jesus was commanding the assembly to duplicate this exact structural subversion in their daily lives. The logic is bulletproof. If the ultimate source of authority doesn't insulate himself with status, then absolutely no leader has the right to demand high-status treatment.
The earliest leaders understood this perfectly. They didn't view this as a mild suggestion, they viewed it as a devastating critique of worldly power and a mandatory blueprint for leadership. According to Clement of Rome, writing around 96 AD, the scepter of the majesty of God, even our Lord Jesus Christ, came not in the show of pride and arrogance, but with a humble mind. And this brilliantly illustrates how early assemblies viewed leadership. They recognized that true power in this new community was completely incompatible with pride. The scepter of their king was, quite literally, a dirty towel.
Let's move to Section 3, a radical assembly lifestyle. How did this actualize in the real world?
When we look at the historical data pre-250 AD, we see three primary occasions for this practice. First, hospitality. This was daily or as needed, tethered directly to the text of 1 Timothy 5:10, welcoming travelers. Second, the communal gathering. Members would actively wash each other's feet before the weekly agape love feast. And third, a post-baptismal rite. This marked a new member's transition into a life of service. So you see, this was not a once-a-year calendar performance. It was an event-driven, recurring lifestyle habit. It was a dynamic, physical response to shared communal life.
This physical act was seen as a cure for the human ego. According to Clement of Alexandria, writing around 195 AD, this was essential for community health. He wrote, "If the Lord and Master did this, how much more should we wash the feet of the brothers? It is a medicine for pride." I want you to picture this. A wealthy, aristocratic homeowner getting down on their knees at an agape meal to scrub the filthy feet of a day laborer or a slave. It functioned as a radical mechanism for social leveling. The Roman class system simply could not survive in a room where everyone was fighting for the lowest possible position.
The mechanics of this unity are found in the reciprocal Greek pronoun allalon, which means one another. This reveals something deeply analytical about early Christian unity. You might ask, why not just wash your own feet? Well, because you cannot de-world yourself in isolation. Unity required the highly vulnerable intervention of a peer acting as a servant. It demanded mutual submission. By letting someone else handle the dirtiest, most unpresentable part of your life, worldly social standing within the assembly was completely erased. You were totally leveled.
Which leads us to Section 4, cleansing the spiritual souls. This is where the physical dust meets profound life application. According to Origen of Alexandria, in his commentary on John, this is the absolute crux of the practice. He develops this brilliant concept of the souls of the soul. Origen wrote, "The residue of the soul's movement remains in contact with the earth. The feet cannot avoid being soiled unless one is constantly protected by Christ's Spirit." Think about how incredibly relevant this is for a 20-something today. Your daily walk gathers the spiritual dust of modern culture just by existing. You are walking through the sledge of digital pride, materialism, comparison, and profound anxiety every single day. You can't avoid it. Just like the ancient Judean couldn't avoid the limestone dust, you cannot avoid the residue of the world, and that residue requires constant, daily, localized attention.
So the crucial point is that the spiritual metaphor relies entirely on the objective physical nuisance of dirty feet to have any symbolic power at all. If their feet had been perfectly clean inside closed shoes, a ritual washing would lack the scandalous, gritty humility that Jesus intended. The physical reality of street dust perfectly mirrored the spiritual reality of gathering the residue of worldly influence. The physical act literally stripped away the dirt, while the communal act of submission stripped away spiritual arrogance. They were woven together.
And this leads us to a profound thesis statement for anyone seeking genuine community today. You cannot de-world yourself. It requires the intervention of a brother or sister in an act of love. Why does this matter for you and me? Because true accountability requires us to actually let others into our messy, unpolished, dusty areas of life. You pick up the arrogance and anxiety of the culture without even realizing it. To be cleansed requires you to drop your status, let your guard down, and allow someone else to humbly serve you.
Sadly, things changed. Let's look at Section 5, the fall into institutional ritual, and how this dynamic lifestyle began to decay.
Let's move to and see how this builds through a forensic linguistic audit. We can trace exactly how this vibrant house assembly tradition was frozen into a stiff, professionalized ceremony through new Latin overlays after 300 AD. The Greek mysterion, which means a hidden truth revealed, was replaced by the Latin sacramentum, which was a legal pledge. Partidosis, handing down a living lifestyle, became traditio, a rigid transmission of authority. And diaconia, low status, dirty service, became ministerium, an official elevated clerical office. These Latin legal terms systematically stripped the mutual, leveling power from the practice as it moved out of the intimate house assemblies and into the massive formal basilicas.
We can see the seeds of this early on. According to Irenaeus of Lyons in his work Against Heresies, he forcefully argued that the tradition which is of the apostles, which is guarded by the successions of elders in the churches, must be held. But listen, when Irenaeus spoke of peridosis, this tradition, he meant handing down a shared lifestyle of active, gritty love. Over time, however, the structural gravity shifted completely. What was once active mutual love became a professional clergyman washing a select few subordinates just once a year. The medicine for pride tragically became an institutional monopoly.
Which leaves us with this final, haunting question to reflect on. Have we traded a radical lifestyle of subversion for a safe, institutional performance? The early assemblies wielded a simple basin and a towel to utterly dismantle the class systems, the pride, and the rigid power structures of the Roman world. Look at the hierarchies around us today, in our workplaces, our schools, and our digital spaces. Are we just endlessly perpetuating that exhausting climb for status? Or are we willing to pick up the towel, expose our spiritual dust to others, and de-world ourselves in love? I leave you with that, and I highly encourage you to study this further.